It's so nice to finally meet you in person.
The pleasure is all mine. You look even more lovely in person.
Millionaire took his ugly secretary to dinner, and the world finally saw who she really was. No one ever noticed her when she entered a room. That was the point. Elena Brooks had learned early in life that being invisible was safer than being seen. Seen people were judged. Seen people were hurt. Invisible people survived. So every morning at precisely 7:12 a.m., Elena stepped into the glass tower of Harrington Global, wearing the same shapeless beige cardigan, the same low bun pulled too tight, the same thick glasses that hid more than just her eyesight. Her shoes were sensible. Her makeup non-existent. Her presence forgettable. At 28 she had mastered the art of being overlooked. And nowhere was that skill more necessary than on the 46th floor. That floor belonged to Julian Harrington. Billionaire. Media darling. Corporate prodigy. The youngest CEO to ever take a company public twice before the age of 35. His name appeared on magazine covers beside words like visionary, ruthless, genius. Inside the office, though, he was something else entirely. Cold, precise, distant. Elena knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission, balancing a leather planner, a tablet, and a porcelain cup of espresso she had memorized down to the exact temperature he preferred. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," she said quietly, placing the cup at the precise angle he liked. Julian didn't look up. Push the Zurich call to tomorrow. Cancel lunch. And why hasn't legal finalized the Westbridge acquisition? Legal flagged a discrepancy in subsection C, Elena replied calmly. I sent you a summary at 6:42 a.m. with 2 suggested workarounds. Julian paused. Just for a moment. His fingers stilled on the keyboard. He scanned his inbox, found the email, and nodded once. Fine, he said. Implement option 2. That was it. No thank you. No acknowledgement. No eye contact. Elena turned to leave, her role completed once again like a shadow slipping back into the wall. Wait. She stopped. The Calderon Foundation dinner, Julian said. Tomorrow night. My date cancelled. Elena's grip tightened slightly on her tablet. I can contact the agency and arrange. No. He finally looked at her. Not really. Just enough to register function, not form. You'll come with me. The words didn't land at first. I'm sorry, sir? You manage my calendar. You know the donors. You understand the politics. I don't need someone decorative. I need someone competent. There was no insult in his tone, which somehow made it worse. I don't have appropriate attire, Elena said carefully. Julian waved a dismissive hand. Use the company card. Buy whatever is necessary. Consider it a work expense. And just like that, the most powerful man in the building turned back to his screen. Conversation over. Elena stood there for a moment longer than she should have, then quietly exited. Inside the elevator, her reflection stared back at her through the stainless steel walls. Why me? She wondered. And beneath that question lurked another, far more dangerous one. Why now? The Calderon Foundation dinner was not a dinner. It was a spectacle. An annual parade of wealth, influence, and unspoken hierarchy where people didn't eat so much as display themselves. Invitations were currency. Seating arrangements were power. And women, especially women on the arms of men like Julian Harrington, were expected to sparkle. Elena stood outside the boutique on Fifth Avenue, staring at her reflection in the window. She didn't belong here. She had never belonged anywhere like this. Inside, a sales associate looked her up and down, eyes flicking briefly to the cardigan, the glasses, the sensible shoes. How can I help you? The woman asked, polite but distant. I need a dress, Elena said. For a formal dinner. The associate's expression softened into practiced sympathy. Our evening collection starts at the back. Elena nodded and followed. What happened next felt unreal. Fabric after fabric. Silk. Satin. Cuts that assumed confidence Elena had buried years ago. She tried on dress after dress, each one revealing a version of herself she didn't recognize, and wasn't sure she deserved. Until the associate stopped. This one, she said quietly, holding up a deep emerald gown. Elena stared. It was elegant. Simple. Dangerous in its restraint. I can't. Just try it. In the fitting room, Elena slipped the dress over her shoulders. And froze. The mirror didn't show the secretary anymore. It showed a woman. Someone with curves she'd hidden. Posture she'd folded inward. Eyes that looked awake. Her breath caught. For the first time in years she didn't look small. She looked powerful. The next day Elena didn't come to work. She took a personal day, her first in 3 years. She went to a salon no one at the office knew she could afford. Her hair was released from its tight prison and styled into soft waves that framed her face. The glasses were replaced with contacts. Subtle makeup highlighted features she'd always treated like liabilities. By evening, she barely recognized herself. And that terrified her. Julian Harrington checked his watch for the third time in the hotel lobby. Elena was late. That was impossible. She was never late. He opened his mouth to text her when a ripple of attention moved through the room. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Julian looked up and stopped breathing. The woman approaching him was stunning. Not flashy. Not desperate. Just undeniable. Her emerald dress moved like liquid. Her posture was calm, assured. Her eyes, sharp, intelligent, met his without hesitation. She stopped in front of him. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington." The voice hit him like a memory. "Elena?" he asked, disbelief breaking through his composure. She smiled gently. "Yes." For the first time since he'd met her, Julian Harrington truly saw his secretary. And in that moment, everything he thought he understood, about power, beauty, and control, began to fracture. The same room that ignored her, now whispered her name. The ballroom fell quiet in a way Elena had never experienced before. Not silent, just aware. She felt it the moment she stepped beside Julian. The subtle pause in conversations. The delayed clink of glasses. The way eyes lingered a fraction of a second too long, as if the room itself was recalibrating. This was the same society that would have brushed past her yesterday. Now it leaned forward. Julian sensed it too. For the first time in his life, he was not the most visually commanding presence in the room. He had built his identity on control, numbers, negotiations, outcomes, but none of that prepared him for the strange disorientation of standing beside a woman he had underestimated so completely. He offered his arm. Elena accepted, her hand light but steady. As they moved through the crowd, introductions came fast. "Julian, you didn't mention you were bringing someone so extraordinary. And who might this be?" Elena smiled politely, answering before Julian could. "Elena Brooks," she said. "I work with Mr. Harrington." The reactions were immediate and telling. Some nodded approvingly. Others blinked in confusion. A few women's smiles tightened, their eyes flicking from Elena's dress to Julian's posture, noting the subtle shift in power. Julian watched it all unfold with growing unease. This wasn't admiration for him. It was fascination with her. They stopped near a cluster of donors when a familiar voice cut through the noise. Well, the man said smoothly. "Looks like Harrington finally learned how to surprise people." Julian stiffened. Marcus Vale. His rival. His mirror. The man who smiled while destroying companies. Marcus's gaze settled on Elena with open curiosity, not crude, but sharp, evaluative, like someone spotting an opportunity. "And you must be the reason everyone's talking," Marcus said, offering his hand. Marcus Vale. Elena took it briefly, then released it. "Elena Brooks," she replied. Marcus's brow lifted. "Interesting. That name wasn't on the guest list." Elena met his eyes without flinching. Neither was mine for most rooms like this. Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Approval. Or interest. Julian noticed and didn't like it. Dinner was served. Elena navigated conversation effortlessly. She discussed charitable impact, tax structures, international development, topics she had absorbed quietly over years of managing Julian's empire from behind the scenes. People leaned in when she spoke. They remembered her name. Julian watched, unsettled. He had always assumed power spoke loudly. Elena proved it didn't have to. Across the table, Marcus observed them both, filing away every glance, every shift in posture. By dessert, whispers had spread. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why hasn't Harrington ever mentioned her? And beneath it all, an unspoken assumption. She didn't belong here. Not really. Monday morning arrived like a collision with reality. Elena returned to the office wearing her usual cardigan. Her hair was pulled back again. The glasses returned. The invisibility restored. But it didn't work anymore. People stared. Whispers followed her through the halls. Julian's office door opened more often than usual. His eyes lingered when she spoke. He seemed uncertain. That alone changed the balance of the room. "About the dinner," he said finally, leaning against her desk. "You handled yourself exceptionally." "Thank you," Elena replied professionally. There was a pause. "I didn't know," Julian admitted. How capable you are." Elena looked up slowly. "I've always been capable," she said. You just never needed to notice. The words were gentle, but they landed hard. Before Julian could respond, Marcus Vale stepped off the elevator, confidence rolling off him like a tailored suit. "Elena Brooks," he said smoothly. "I was hoping I'd run into you." Julian's jaw tightened. Marcus smiled. "Relax. I'm not here to steal employees. Just to make conversation." He turned to Elena. "Lunch? I'd love to hear how someone so underestimated became so indispensable." Elena hesitated. Julian waited. For once he didn't command. "I have work," Elena said politely. Marcus nodded, unfazed. "Another time then." As he left, his parting words hung in the air like a challenge. "Don't stay invisible too long, Elena. People eventually resent what they don't understand." That evening doubt crept in. Elena replayed the night in her mind. The looks, the whispers, the way Julian still introduced her as his assistant. Never more. She thought of the years she had spent shrinking herself so others could feel tall. And she wondered for the first time if being seen was dangerous or necessary. The moment they tried to put her back in her place, the first real crack didn't come from a stranger. It came from the boardroom. Elena sat at the long glass table, her tablet open, posture composed. This meeting, like so many before, was supposed to be routine. Quarterly forecasts, strategic approvals, controlled outcomes. But something was different. Julian stood at the head of the table, presenting a major expansion plan. His voice was confident, practiced. The room listened, until someone interrupted. "I'm not convinced," one of the senior board members said, leaning back in his chair. "The European risk exposure is understated." Julian opened his mouth to respond. Elena spoke first. "The exposure appears understated because the model assumes stable trade corridors," she said calmly. "But if you factor in the proposed regulatory changes in Frankfurt, the margin holds. I adjusted the projection last night." Silence. Every head turned toward her. The board member frowned. "And you are?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Elena Brooks. I manage Mr. Harrington's strategic operations." A beat. Then a chuckle. "Interesting," the man said. "I wasn't aware assistants were now responsible for financial modeling." The room laughed politely. Julian felt it like a punch. Elena didn't flinch. "The model is sound," she said evenly. "If you'd like, I can walk you through the assumptions." The man waved her off. "That won't be necessary." Julian swallowed. He said nothing. That hurt more than the laughter. After the meeting, Elena returned to her desk with practiced calm. But inside something was shifting. She had been invisible long enough to survive. Now she was visible, and being diminished on purpose. Julian emerged from his office an hour later. "I should have said something," he admitted quietly. "That was uncalled for." Elena looked up. "But you didn't," she replied. Not accusing. Just stating fact. Julian hesitated. "This environment requires silence," she finished. "Or obedience?" Her voice wasn't raised. That somehow made it worse. Before Julian could answer, his phone buzzed. Marcus Vale. The timing was no accident. Marcus's invitation came that evening. Dinner. Private room. Neutral territory. Elena considered declining. Then she accepted. Not because she trusted him, but because she trusted herself. The restaurant was understated luxury. No spectacle. No crowd. Marcus studied her as she sat. "You know," he said, "they tried to put you back in your place today." Elena didn't deny it. "Julian doesn't protect what he doesn't fully claim," Marcus continued. "You're useful to him. But usefulness has a ceiling." Elena's eyes sharpened. "And what are you offering?" Marcus smiled. "Visibility." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents Elena recognized immediately. Her work. Models. Strategies. Projections. Rebranded under Julian's name. "He's brilliant," Marcus said lightly. "But you're the architecture. And architecture deserves credit." Elena closed the folder slowly. "You're not doing this out of kindness," she said. "No," Marcus agreed. "I'm doing it because you're powerful, and powerful people change the game." The breaking point came 2 days later. Julian announced a press conference. A major acquisition. Reporters filled the room. Cameras flashed. Julian spoke confidently about innovation, foresight, leadership. Elena stood to the side. As always, until a reporter asked the question. "Who designed the risk framework that made this acquisition possible?" Julian paused. A fraction too long. "The team," he said finally. "Collective effort." Elena felt the room tilt. That was it. Not the insult. Not the dismissal. The erasure. She turned and walked out. That night, Elena didn't cry. She made a decision. She pulled out her phone and called Marcus Vale. The day the room turned against them. The press release went live at 8:01 a.m. By 8:03, Julian Harrington's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. By 8:07, the markets reacted. And by 8:12, the narrative he had spent years controlling began slipping through his fingers. Elena watched it all unfold from a quiet cafe across town, her phone resting untouched beside her coffee. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She observed. The headline spread fast. Vale Strategic acquires controlling stake in Westbridge. Markets shocked by precision timing. The article praised Marcus Vale's unexpected brilliance, citing a risk framework so precise analysts called it surgical. Elena recognized every line. It was hers. Julian read the article twice before comprehension hit. No, he whispered. He refreshed the page. Then again. The framework. The language. The assumptions. All familiar. All stolen, yet legally untouchable. Because Elena had designed it before Westbridge was even public knowledge. Because she had done it on her own time. Because she owned it. Julian's office filled quickly. Board members. Advisors. Legal counsel. Voices overlapped. How did Vale move first? Why didn't we see this? Who leaked the framework? Julian stood frozen. He knew the answer. Elena's resignation email arrived at 9:22 a.m. Short. Professional. Irreversible. Effective immediately. Julian stared at it. Then he ran. Not to the boardroom. Not to legal. To her desk. Empty. No cardigan. No glasses. No trace. For the first time since founding Harrington Global, Julian felt panic. Not business panic. Personal. The fallout was brutal. Investors demanded explanations. Media speculated about internal fractures. Analysts questioned Julian's leadership for the first time in his career. And Marcus Vale? He stayed silent. Which made everything worse. That afternoon, Elena stood on a different stage. A smaller one. An industry roundtable. She hadn't been announced. But when she stepped forward, the room leaned in. My name is Elena Brooks, she said calmly. And I designed the risk architecture behind the Westbridge acquisition. Gasps rippled. Cameras turned. Elena didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. For years, she continued, I chose invisibility because it felt safer than being judged. But invisibility has a cost. When you erase yourself long enough, others learn how to erase you too. The room was silent. I'm done with that. The clip went viral within hours. Julian watched it alone in his office. Her words echoed. You erase yourself long enough. He remembered the boardroom laughter. The press conference. The moment she walked away. For the first time, Julian Harrington understood what it meant to lose power, not because someone took it, but because he failed to recognize it standing beside him. That evening, Marcus met Elena on a rooftop overlooking the city. You handled that beautifully, he said. Elena nodded. I'm not joining you. Marcus blinked. You could, he offered. We'd dominate. I don't want domination, Elena replied. I want ownership. She turned toward the skyline. I've spent my life making others successful. Now I'm building something that carries my name. Marcus smiled slowly. That, he said, is why you'll win. The invitation arrived 2 days later. A gala. Same foundation. Same ballroom. Different seating. Julian stared at the envelope. Elena Brooks, keynote speaker. When the woman they mocked became the standard they couldn't reach. The ballroom looked the same. Crystal chandeliers. White tablecloths. The quiet hum of power disguised as philanthropy. But the energy was different. People whispered with anticipation, not curiosity. Respect had replaced judgment. Names were spoken carefully now. Julian Harrington entered alone. For the first time in years, no one rushed to greet him. They nodded politely. Some avoided eye contact. Others studied him with something new in their gaze. Reassessment. He felt smaller in this room than he ever had behind a boardroom table. Then the lights dimmed. The host stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, tonight's keynote speaker is someone whose work has reshaped how this industry thinks about power, visibility, and value. Julian's chest tightened. Please welcome Elena Brooks. Applause erupted. Not polite. Not obligatory. Real. Elena stepped onto the stage wearing a simple black dress. No spectacle. No disguise. She didn't glow because of silk or lights. She glowed because she was no longer hiding. Julian barely recognized the woman walking toward the podium, not because she looked different, but because she carried herself like someone who knew exactly who she was. She waited for the applause to fade. Then she spoke. "I was once invited to a dinner like this," Elena began. "Not because I belonged, but because I was useful." The room stilled. "I was intelligent enough to manage outcomes, but not important enough to be acknowledged. Capable enough to build success, but invisible enough to never receive credit. I shifted. Some people looked uncomfortable. Good. I didn't look the way power expected," she continued. "I didn't sound like authority. And because of that, I learned something dangerous, how easy it is for people to overlook what doesn't flatter them." Julian felt every word land. "I'm not here to shame anyone," Elena said calmly. "I'm here to remind you that talent doesn't announce itself. Integrity doesn't wear a uniform. And brilliance doesn't owe you beauty." The applause came again, louder this time. Julian didn't clap. He couldn't. Because for the first time he wasn't watching from a position of control. He was being confronted. After the speech, the crowd surged toward Elena. Executives, investors, board members. People who had once walked past her now waited for her attention. Julian stood back, watching. Then she saw him. Their eyes met across the room. And for the first time since that night she walked out of his press conference, she didn't look away. Julian approached slowly. "Elena," he said, "you were extraordinary." She nodded politely. "Thank you." Pause. "I failed you," he said quietly. "Not as an employer, but as a person." Elena studied him. "I didn't need protection," she replied. "I needed recognition." Julian swallowed. "I know." Another pause. "I built my success by seeing opportunity," he continued. "And I missed the greatest one standing next to me." Elena didn't smile. But she didn't harden either. "You didn't miss it," she said. "You dismissed it." The distinction mattered. Julian nodded. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said. "I don't deserve that." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "I don't need apologies to validate me," she said gently. "I needed distance to discover myself." She extended her hand. Not as an assistant. As an equal. Julian shook it. And in that moment the power dynamic finally balanced. Months later, headlines told a different story. Brooks Strategy Group disrupts industry with ethical model. Former assistant turns architect of change. Invisibility ends, impact begins. Elena hired differently. Led differently. She listened. She credited. She saw people. And that became her greatest advantage. Julian Harrington rebuilt too, but quieter. Wiser. More human. He never underestimated silence again.